So I want to introduce our next panellist, who is Catherine McAlpine, CEO of Inclusion Australia. Catherine is co-chair also of the National Disability Data Asset. With a strong background in disability advocacy, she has worked on major sector reforms and brings her experience as a carer and mother of a young man with an intellectual disability. Catherine, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jane. It's lovely to be here. I'd also like to acknowledge that I live and work on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land in which I am here today. I'd like to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and welcome all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders to the session here today. And also to thank the NDRP for inviting me. When the Disability Royal Commission started, the Australian government provided some additional funding to the then 6 funded disability representative organisations, the DROs, to support people with disability to participate. They also provided funding to Inclusion Australia for the pretty pragmatic reason that people with an intellectual disability were very likely to feature heavily in the DRC's work and would need tailored and expert support to participate. Inclusion Australia decided to use a little bit of that money to invest in a rapid desktop data review of people with an intellectual disability. At the time, we thought the information we wanted was pretty straightforward: prevalence, demographics, government support, restricted decision-making and practice, schooling, employment, living situations, and access to technology. The report we received stated, the compilation of data for this report highlighted the difficulties in accessing reliable and comparable information about people with intellectual disability in Australia. There is a need for agreement on definitions of intellectual disability to inform consistent data collection at Commonwealth and state and territory levels, to enable comparison, accurate reporting, to inform the provision of relevant supports and services, including advocacy. It also said, we were unable to find any publicly available data to report on the breakdown of prevalence by specific conditions. Similarly, data indicating multiple diagnoses is lacking. Government data related to those with intellectual disability in aged care and those receiving education and skills training, those with guardianship and financial management is similarly lacking. A breakdown of the numbers and types of accommodation for people with an intellectual disability is not available. The report did, however, document, for example, the senior practitioner of Victoria's Department of Human Services database of reported cases of chemical or mechanical restraint. This provided information of a bit over 31,000 episodes of restrictive interventions relating to behaviour interventions involving over 2,000 people during the sort of 2007-2008 period. I myself will never forget when I served on the Victorian Disability Advisory Council and we visited, and I was the mother of a young primary school aged child with an intellectual disability, and we went to the institutions, and I will never ever forget, because I didn't know what was going to happen, that I would see a whole lot of middle-aged people with intellectual disability completely zonked out on recliners watching mindless TV. The visceral reaction will never leave me. And so it was both astounding and unsurprising to me to learn that over 65% of the use of restraints were described as routine. It brought home just how much restrictive practice is normalised and how data about it is not collected. Of course, the DRC itself created a relative explosion in the data and evidence available about restrictive practice. And its commissioned report, and I'm going to say exactly the same words that Linda said before, to quote Linda and Claire, that it unequivocally found that people with disability are subject to the greatest use of restrictive practice in segregated and congregated contexts. He reported that while people with disabilities' experience of some forms of restrictive practice are well explored, such as experience of seclusion or involuntary mental health treatment, experience of other forms of restrictive practice, such as guardianship or financial management, are rarely considered. Also, that very few researchers venture into group homes to speak with people with disability, and to the best of our knowledge, little to no attempts have been made to capture the accounts of people with disability subject to restrictive practices in the context of Australian disability enterprises, day programs, out-of-home care, immigration detention, and in the family home. Many of you watching today will be aware of Inclusion Australia's polished pathway provocation. That is that the interfaces of the government systems that people with intellectual disability need to navigate have been polished in such a way that people with an intellectual disability, including people who are also autistic, are smoothly transitioned into a lifetime of segregation. And what is often overlooked is that there is now no doubt remaining that segregation breeds the normalisation of restrictive practice. The time has come to address the pathologization, I can't even say the word, my own word, of behaviour and the way this incentivises the use and overuse of restrictive practices. We need to centre the lived experience of people with disability who have experienced restrictive practice in the research. We need to investigate the role of the education system in producing traumatised young adults who now have a psychosocial disability on top of their dual diagnosis of intellectual disability and autism. We need to better understand emotional dysregulation and how early access to communication support and supported decision-making, together with a sense of belonging in the community, are critical to the effort to eliminate restrictive practices. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you very much, Catherine, for speaking about the experiences of people with intellectual disability and disability more broadly, noting some of those practical challenges and some of the evidence gaps that we really do need to address.